and welcome to this month's edition of Slugger TV. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how COVID has impacted the third sector. This is part of our Reset series, which is being hosted in partnership with Ulster Bank. And to go through this very interesting topic, we have Gráinne Walsh, who is the Director of Stratagem NI, and we have Jacinta Linden, who is the Chief Executive of Space NI and also sits on the board of CO3. Okay, Gráinne, just to lay out the parameters here, how has the COVID-19 pandemic, how has it hit the third sector in particular?
Starkly, the figures are frightening, with about 73% of NICFA members reporting a closure of their services, with an interesting 25% of members reporting a significant, close to 50% drop in services as well. We are seeing a tale of two parts. The decline and then a significant growth for some organisations in new services as they responded to emerging needs. And that's something Jacinta has individual experience of and she'll be able to talk to in detail. But we're seeing significant drop, growth, and actually real concern in terms of fundraising, revenue generation. We know, for example, that large medical research charities are experiencing 50% drops in revenue, 50% drop in the monies that they will be able to allocate to critical medical research from heart disease through to cancer. And so what we're seeing is what we will have to explore is the long-term effects of a particular crisis in the third sector and actually in those core services that they deliver on behalf of all of us now and in the future.
How, from your perspective, has it impacted? I mean, Gráinne's laid out some of the figures there. What have you seen?
Well, first of all, it's been a difficult experience for everyone and for every sector. And I know the focus has tended to be on business and business recovery. But actually, I think some of the learning coming out of COVID was just how able and capable the third sector was to stand up and be counted at the point of need. And I think when you talk about the third sector, you need to encompass the whole aspect of the third sector, because volunteerism from the ground up was very obvious and it didn't need organised, in the way that people perhaps think it does. So one positive is that we've got a new sense of volunteers who, with the appropriate compliance measures in place from organisations like Volunteer Now, that's a plus for the future. There's many negatives, and Gráinne has alluded to the stats and the data behind the impact on fundraising. And I suppose, if you mothball your charity shops, that hit is felt right through, the whole of society, because I work for a charity that primarily provides family support to people, vulnerable, who are impacted by material poverty. Not only will the income drop, which is up to 90% at some of the larger charities, impact on the services, and as Gráinne has alluded to, the research capacities further down the line. There's a very acute difference being made at society level, where people can't go and buy coats for their children or items for their home that normally they could turn to in a charity shop. So that has decimated kind of that access to easily accessible goods, and also it's impacted on the volunteers whose mental health was benefited by volunteering. So just to tip back into sort of what we've seen in terms of themes emerging. Obviously, some of the larger organisations couldn't furlough staff because they needed their skills. And again, Gráinne's talking about where some organisations have experienced huge growth and demand. Our own organisation, we had a 70% increase in service output, because being at the coalface of a community around practical family support to older people and to children and families, we needed more staff than ever, not to furlough them. But equally, other organisations who are now in the next couple of weeks facing redundancies and business efficiency measures, in order for them to remain compliant, that's huge problems and challenges to come.
Mm-hmm. And Gráinne, Jacinta's been talking there about the volunteers thing. I mean, it's a bit like the Wile E. Coyote syndrome, where you're running off the cliff and you feel you're still going, but then the drop is going to come. So obviously, as we reopen the economy and as things slightly get back to the new normal, is there a real danger there of us not thinking about, okay, how do we deal with the post kind of lockdown world?
So there's strategic conversations taking place, planning taking place, and we see that commitment from the executive, from the sector more broadly. However, it's that in-between phase. It's between the lifting of lockdown and when we have completely adapted to the new world. And that the challenge there is actually the lag in revenue, because we will not see the fundraising come through. People will not be running the marathon. They won't be gathering together for the coffee fundraisers or whatever that is. So there is a significant gap that needs to be managed. But I think the third sector isn't alone in that. And we are now in possibly the most difficult phase of whatever it is we are living through. So while it is a real opportunity for pause and reset, it's this phase of where do we gather the monies to keep people viable, to keep organisations viable. And the need hasn't gone away. We are looking at managing and delivering for all those people we knew who were vulnerable before, people known to us, but also the new vulnerable, the new poor. And that's where you have seen the growth in service demands, and you will have seen Jacinta and her colleagues up and down these islands meeting with, engaging with, supporting new people, new families, engaging with the benefit system for the very first time. And they will need particular support. So it's the bridging piece we need to get right. And that will be critical as we come to the end of furlough and as we move into, I would say, mid next year, as we may see some sort of rebalancing or steadying of the ship economically.
And Jacinta, just on that, the period we're in at the minute and that we're probably going to be in for at least the next few months, I mean, Gráinne's alluded to the fact that, one of the key things, key parts of fundraising for many third sector things was actually kind of a lot of small things done by many people. So running the marathon, the coffee mornings, or maybe the wee fundraisers somewhere, and you've alluded to charity shops as well. What can be, do you think we are fully appreciative of the fact that those things have stopped? I mean, we've had new regulations imposed by the executive this week in parts of Belfast. I mean, are we appreciative enough of the situation that the sector is finding itself in with regards to fundraising?
I'm not sure if the penny has dropped outside of the sector, but I think when people stop being able to access, for example, mammograms that are provided by the third sector or advice from chest, heart and stroke, then I think people will start to realise this is a bigger issue than they had considered. So you will also, I think, see quite a bit of tension across the sector because, there's a sense of people contesting for the dollar, because there's a lot of organisations sitting at an interface of need, and whilst I think it has to be said that the Department of Community did a really successful job in terms of getting to those people known vulnerable. The issue for us has been, as Gráinne said, the new poor. These are families where maybe mum has been furloughed, which is a 20% loss of income, and then dad's been made redundant. That's 120% out of their weekly budget, plus the fact that parents and families are at home more often with heating on, cooking 3 meals a day. Add into that mix and if there's a child with a disability or a mental health issue, the demand is huge. But the opportunities, I think, to create a conduit of funding exists by connecting, and I think you're right, Gráinne, the bigger picture, that strategic picture will come, but there's something needs to be done now to hold that ground.
Yeah, and that's where we have there's been gaps identified within funding that we can address or need to address. However, the benefits of the COVID response was the level of flexibility that was injected into the system. And you will have followed the debates about the relationship between the third sector and the state and funders. And there's always been this narrative about the need for flexibility, the need to support charities to do what they do best, acting in the public interest, of course. And that level of flexibility stood us in good stead in the last 6 months, and we need to see that continue. And that would be definitely be the message from the sector. Now, the danger will be as we unwind, as there's conversations about what worked and didn't work, that we could see a retrenchment in terms of some of the processes, and where audit becomes king. Now, that's not saying that audit isn't important. It is really, really critical, but there needs to be proportionality, and there needs to be that acceptance of a level of risk at a time that we just need to get out there and support people.
Yeah, and Jacinta, obviously, as you were been alluding there, sometimes the revenue has fallen, but the need is going up exponentially, and as you're saying, loads of new challenges are popping up from lockdown that we just haven't figured. How do you think that this sector can make, it's a broad sector, but how do you think it can get that message across? Because quite often when you think of the third sector, you don't often twig to the fact that, well, need is going up by 70-80%, and maybe your funding has fallen by 20-30%, even when you take in support you're getting from the executive.
Okay, so there's kind of a tension there, which has always been there from community development and the third sector evolved. And, some of the learning has been around positions taken, where flexibility and easement created really worthwhile and clever projects at the time of need. We've always said this, and the difficulty is, and I think you're hinting, David, around why do people not know more of this? Because it's difficult to bite the hand that feeds you. And I think the elephant in the room is the relationship between commissioner and deliverer, and how we need to get procurement to a shared level, so that the third sector has as much say in influencing the direction of investment, for want of a better word. And I'll go back to, kind of the theories that underpin community development. The earlier you can provide an intervention to support a person, the longer they will stay without a need for intervention. And for a long time, and I know it's budgetary led, we only get budgets for a year and whatever, it's very difficult to support an individual when their funding runs out at the end of the year. Sure. So then that brings us into a different dilemma, which is for those organisations that have said, okay, we are not going to be grant dependent anymore. We're going to move towards a hybrid where we become more business efficient. So for some organisations, and I suppose that's the frustration, Gráinne, for those organisations that have gone down quality standards route, who have really strong governance, the fact that there's still that sense that we have to be governed tightly. And COVID showed us that we don't actually, some of the big lottery decisions in the Department of Communities were really good, targeted, responsive, reflective pieces.
So I think organisations, society, we talked about change for many, many years. We talked about working from home, flexibility, great in theory, but many organisations in practice didn't like that at all. And now we've just all been forced to do it. And you know what? I've had to reconcile myself to dealing with Zoom. So, and we've all had our burdens during this period, some more than others, I have to say. But so it is about us, our conversations just catching up with reality. And where there's been blockers, inertia before, actually we've all just done a great mass social experiment. And the trick will be to capture the best of that. And it will be the best of it. Now, in theory, what Jacinta is talking about, which is an outcomes-based approach that focuses on prevention and well-being, actually is reflected in the Programme for Government, which has it at its heart. So we have an institution, we have our entire governance system since 2017 focused on outcomes. We have had the greatest experiment in actually the delivery of an outcomes-based approach on the ground in the last 6 months. And the opportunity now is to knit the two together.
And what was interesting about it, you bring it up, I remember when the pandemic started and Michelle O'Neill's Deputy First Minister saying that the rulebook had been ripped up in terms of funding going out the door, no more huge applications, this money needs to be shovel ready, out the door, get it to people who need it. And going back to what you've talked about, if you ever apply for a job in the charity sector, a lot of people who come from the private sector can often be perplexed when they see job funding dependent until March of whatever year it is. Do you think we might see a change in that about maybe government or funding bodies saying, actually, do you know what, the year-to-year thing, maybe we need to go maybe every other year, every 2 years, every 3 years, and look at funding that way?
I think it has to go. I think it's a strategic decision. But I mean, I would take umbrage with the point that we're the only sector that has an unknown about sustaining employment, because there's no sector I know right now at the moment who really can look beyond their bottom line at the end of the next quarter or the end of the next end of year. So I think something about and maybe this is about Northern Ireland actually, and about our perspective of employment, but you're absolutely right. I took time out of the third sector and worked for a large global recruitment agency, and when I said, look, I'm leaving to go to the third sector, they're horrified. They couldn't see why would you do that? But actually, if you work in sales or production or manufacturing, you're really just as good as your order line, and if that ceases or your credit ceases, you're as much as risk. So your point's interesting, and I think it feeds into that bigger piece that needs done about what is the third sector. What does it do? What's our responsibility? I mean, people still say, aren't you so good to work for charity? And I say, but it's just like working for any other business. We have to have costs and sales and responsibility. So there's a piece there needs done.
Yeah, aren't you very good to work for a charity? Aren't you very?
I love it.
You love it.
When we're getting
but no, but the thing is, so that shows you the value that we attribute to charitable work. And there's a sense sometimes for people who work in the third sector that you should, it's a voluntary act, it's for nothing. And so that can be reflected within a certain, I think, tranche of the voluntary community sector in terms of low wages. Not in all cases, but in some. And I will say in terms of the private sector, as you say, you are only as good as your credit line or your growth. So sometimes I'm not surprised when I see charities saying subject to funding. What I think will be important though is this rule book. There's an opportunity to tweak, amend, slim down, I don't know, whatever the term you want to use, this particular rule book. But we've seen that work started. The Audit Office has, here in Northern Ireland, has produced some very interesting advanced thinking on this. And that's interesting in terms of auditing for outcomes and also partnership working with the Audit Office. So if you need some light reading, I'd take a look at that. But that's really critical to begin to have that conversation. Now, where we need to be is we need our politicians to be thinking that way. And we need everybody to be comfortable about the flexibility. And we need to remember, though, in all of this, while we will all aspire to multi-year budgets, we're expecting the Chancellor to go to a single-year budget when he's speaking to us come November. And that's a direct response to COVID. So unfortunately, while we would like to be moving, we would prefer to be moving towards the GB model of multi-year budgets. GB has moved to the Northern Ireland, will be moving to the Northern Ireland model of single-year budgets, and that's austerity. So how do you manage to create sustainable organisations and a sustainable sector in annual budgets? That's a great challenge for the executive, and they're up for it. Most definitely, we've seen great cooperation, and we have seen some really great innovative thinking. Some things haven't been as good. We're all human, but I think there is an opportunity there. But it's going to get trickier in terms of budgets and money allocation.
And we're looking at the whole point of this series is that we're looking at how we reset things. So, how do we think the third sector can play that I mean, we've talked a wee bit about this, but more directly, how do we think the third sector can play a part? And not just because when we think of resetting, we think of only the economy, but I'm talking about broader, like how do we reset kind of Northern Ireland, the way we think, the way we look at things? What role do you think the third sector can play in that conversation?
Well, I think an equal role is the first thing I would say. For too long we have been Cinderella, we have taken the crumbs from the table. And thinking about what Gráinne is saying there about the challenge of 1 year budget, we don't know any different. And a lot of our organisations, we don't get any my organisation, we don't get any core funding. So anything we have is about delivery of a damn good service. And, in many ways we reflect the wider values of the third sector, which is about, integrity and transparency and being reactive. So I think we need to hold that piece. I do think, David, there's a need to support our leaders. I think our chief executive, senior management teams are tired. I think we need to find a way through in partnership. The battle to do the daily work is one battle. If somebody said to me, how do you run a business when you're constantly looking over your shoulders to know who's going to pay the wages? And I said, I don't know any other way. That's how we've done it. That's how we've always done it. So you never overpromise, but you seriously overdeliver, because you know that once you meet the need, more will come. So did you want to come in there, Gráinne?
I think there is support for leaders. That's critical, and that's across the piece, whether it's the third sector, the private sector, but also our political leaders, and everybody is tired. There's no two ways about it. There is a particular piece in terms of attributing value to the work of the voluntary and community sector, but it's also the voluntary community sector play a vital role in our economy. I think overall, there's something like 17,000 medical researchers across the UK employed by medical research charities. They contribute £1.9 billion into the economy. Like, it's serious. There's serious contributions, and they're the big brand names that we know. Never mind, the more local charities that we see. So there is a value, but it's also how do we value the unique contribution of many charities, and it's that kindness piece. And that's all you heard about, those acts of kindness, and that was really that was a fabulous write-up that you got. Really? It was fabulous to see, but it epitomised everything that we need to see more of, or we need, if it's saying it's great you work in the charitable sector, well, let's make sure that people are compensated appropriately. Procurement reflects what is important.
And I think, I'm happy to talk about that kindness piece, because I get goosebumps with it, because it was something that and I will come back to it, but there's been an interesting development, I think, Gráinne, in relation to Social Enterprise NI hosted the, I'm not sure if it's CPD, so it's the procurement department, and did a webinar. And it was a fantastic opportunity to meet, the people who were in charge of procurement, and to walk through the process, and to know that you had the right to access that information in a really approachable way. And I think, there's been key stalwarts like Sue Gray and Conor Murphy and Diane Dodds, who have made these kind of civil servants that before might have seemed out of reach part of your conversation. And in a way, I think that's the place we need to get closer to, which is having real honest conversations. If it can be so bold as go back to the kindness piece, I am liable to go off on a rant with this one, but at the beginning of COVID, we have a big lottery funded project which is about delivering practical support. So that's for families, maybe where somebody in the family has cancer and we take the kids to school, or cook breakfast, or do the groceries, or clean the house, or take the kids for a walk. And as COVID was, kind of locking down our worlds, our family support workers were still doing garden visits and, working through Zoom and projects. And at one of our staff meetings, I could see the body language of two of the family support workers kind of just cowed a wee bit. And I said, look, is there a problem here? And Jenna, who would be, a home baker and a mum of three, and she can manage more in an hour than I can do in a week. And she said, we need to do more. I said, Jenna, what more can we do? And she said, we need to do more. I am leaving these houses and those mums are bereft, those dads are lost. We need to do more. We need something more to happen. And I said, well, what would that look like? And she said, we need to bake them a cake. We need to show kindness. Yeah. So that was on a Wednesday, and on Thursday evening, her and 3 other staff, and I think a few others, got together and did tray bakes and cakes. And they went into our social enterprise and robbed all of our beautiful soy wax candles and made packs. And they kindness dropped these kits to those families and older people who maybe had a partner in hospital, and they literally dropped these. I wanted to call them kindness bombs. And they said, no, they're not kindness, no, don't do kindness bombs. Or love bombs in Northern Ireland won't work. So the kindness kits, they were different. If there was children in the family, there was, colouring books, but mostly they had tray bakes. They had lovely buns or lovely homemade cakes wrapped up beautifully and just left with, we've got your back. And then that snowballed, because clearly some of the stores in around Newry who couldn't sell gave us Easter eggs and gave us stock. And so we started delivering these kindness kits, and then the community and the public started nominating people. So it kind of took on a life of its own. Yeah. So I had to say, no more bacon, girls. We need the work done as well. but I suppose what I was saying to Gráinne, there was something for me outside of being a paid employee, somewhere outside of being a third sector person, that saw it firsthand. The kindness brought kindness. And to this day, we're still packing up those hampers and selling them up.
Yeah, and that was the thing at the start of lockdown. Everyone just wanted to kind of help in some way, whatever, whether it was making a GoFundMe donation or going to bringing something to a food bank. Everyone wanted that. But just, I want to ask you in our final moments, Gráinne, go back to what Jacinta's just said. There is a real resilience in the sector, though. I want to end on a positive. Like there is a real resilience in the third sector, that who can innovate, who can see, like that all came from just one meeting and one question, and then you see a snowball effect.
So the way I look at the voluntary community sector, it's often the first port of call for people, and it's often the last port of call for people, and it has the flexibility and the innovation of humanity in it. And I think, we won't lose that, but we may be narrowed in our aspirations because of funding. So there is, I suppose the message to government is that actually they need a vibrant, strong, resilient voluntary community sector to support it. So individuals need it. So there is absolutely an opportunity now to think in new ways about some critical pieces, and we will see the sector bounce back and do what it's best at, which is responding to human need at critical times. Okay.
Jacinta, just a little bit on that resilience. I know you've given a big example.
I've given a big example, and I think it's what we pride ourselves on. It's often when you don't have a lot, you make the most of it, and I think that's what we've done. There's also something going forward about sharing that responsibility as a partner, and I think around, we would work very closely with GPs, paediatricians, teachers, professionals who see, for example, family support hubs as a really good way of having conversations with professionals before a crisis evolves, so that you can get to the situation earlier and turn that curve so families don't end up in a more critical. So let's drill down to what's working and inform budget, spend, and policy.
Something that's just occurred to me in this conversation is charities will often intervene early, and that can stop more pressure on government services later down the road. So you're spending money kind of to save it if you were taking a bean counter.
And where you will hear all of that, see all of that, is in the draft programme for government. And so we are now seeing the outcomes-based approach, well-being, in actual real life. And we need to capture that, align them to budgets, and then move to achieve the outcomes that we want for families and individuals and our communities across Northern Ireland.
So we've kind of stumbled into the outcomes-based approach in practice.
Well, I don't think we have. I mean, I'm a great believer of that upstream, downstream model, and that story about firefighters and nurses and doctors at a conference, and they go for lunch and they're walking along the river, and the river's crashing down and there's bodies drowning in the river, and every person at the conference is dragging bodies out of the river trying to save them, and somebody says, is nobody looking why they fell in? And so now we've got the opportunity. Why are people falling in the river? Why do we have to keep rescuing people out of the river? So there's been good moves. Siobhan O'Neill, a mental health advocate, and some other, people are listening and change is happening, and it won't all happen at once. And, I suppose in relation to social enterprise, it's still a growing area for development, and we will get there.
Okay.
Mightn't be here to see it, but we'll get there.
Okay. And we are out of time. Thank you so much for what was a really fascinating conversation. I want to thank my guests, Gráinne Walsh and Jacinta Linden. Thank you so very much for tuning in to this episode of Slugger TV. It's part of the Reset series in partnership with Ulster Bank. If you want to view more in our Reset series, you can catch our latest articles on sluggerotool.com. From all of us here, that's all we have time for. Thank you for watching.